Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my 2019 fantasy football tight end rankings. Yes, it may be early on in the 2019 season, but I thought I'd let you guys know what my thoughts on the top 12 at the position are. Before we begin today's video, as per usual, I will have timestamps down below in the description of the video, like I do on all my videos. And that's pretty much it. Today's video will be for half-point PPR scoring formats as we usually do, so no changes there. Before we begin, I also want to mention, if you guys haven't already subscribed, click that subscribe button. Today's challenge is Bobby Wagner. We're talking about the tight end position. And you know, some tight ends have to go over the middle. So this week we got Bobby Wagner sitting over the middle. Get that cursor past him, get it to the subscribe button, subscribe to the channel. Get me to that 5,000 mark, which I'd be much appreciative of. And, you know, try to get us to that next level. So I challenge you, get that cursor to the subscribe button and join the community and continue to get content for the 2019 fantasy season. All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. All right. On this fantastic Saturday, we're talking about the tight end position. So before I begin, specifically, I want to give my thoughts on the tight end position because I think this is the easiest position of the main four to rank due to the fact that really the top 12 tight ends for the last couple seasons have been awful. They have not been great. There has not been a consistent bunch. Yes, there's been top tier tight ends like Gronk, Kelce, Ertz over the last couple seasons, but really after those guys, it's just really been a crapshoot. I think the tight end position, yes, it's going to improve in 2019 comparatively to years past, especially these last two seasons, 2017 and 18. So I think when I begin to like get about the 7th through 12th spot, I'm really splitting hairs in my opinion. I think when I get to that ranking area, those players are going to be separated by less than 10 points by the end of the 2019 fantasy football season. So just to kind of give you an idea, I think, yes, there's a definitive ranking like you see on screen, but I think really a lot of the positions can be switched up, and it's going to be really close by the end of 2019. So anyway, let's talk about my number one ranked tight end for the 2019 season. It's Travis Kelce. As I mentioned before, in all my videos, rankings are subject to change. So if anything happens, for example, someone gets injured, like, you know, every offseason it occurs, someone gets injured, or perhaps, you know, another player joins a team and takes away, you know, specific draft value or fantasy value, I'll adjust it. But anyway, let's talk about my number one ranked tight end, Travis Kelce. Last season, he was the number one ranked tight end, and that's no big surprise because the last three seasons, Travis Kelce has been the number one ranked, the number two ranked, and the number one ranked tight end. In the past three seasons in half-point PPR scoring formats. What did he accomplish last year? Travis Kelce had 150 targets, 103 receptions, 1,336 receiving yards, 13 receiving touchdowns, all accumulating to 243.1 fantasy points. On a per-game basis in 16 weeks, that's 15.19 fantasy points per week. Absolutely fantastic. What a steal when it comes to fantasy football last year. And to put it in perspective, just how good Travis Kelce was. Last season, he was a tight end 1 in 13 of his 16 weeks. And if you had put Travis Kelce in the wide receiver position, because as many of you know, I always like to say that Travis Kelce is a tight end, but he's got the wide receiver mentality, the ability, and he goes and, you know, when he gathers 150 targets, you're really pretty much a wide receiver in a tight end's body, like I always mention. But anyway, if he was a tight end last season, Travis Kelce would have been the number 9 ranked tight end by season's end. So really, he's a top 10 wide receiver, but for our purposes right now, he's the number 1 tight end. What kind of separates Travis Kelce from the pack? Because really, I think Travis Kelce is on his own island. Even though I think Kittle and Ertz really have made their arguments to kind of sneak up within these rankings to kind of make it a little bit closer, Travis Kelce has things that he has opportunity and he has skill that these other guys don't. So specifically, opportunity, right? When you're attached to a Patrick Mahomes-led offense, I mean, goodness gracious, you're obviously going to be fantastic. You know, we saw from 2017 to 2018, Travis Kelce had an increase of 23% on every receiving statistic minimum. So in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, he had a 23% increase minimum on all 4 stats. So just to switch on quarterback, going from Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes, boom, he was almost 25% better in all stats. So that in itself, huge opportunity. Now, other than that, the target share, he had 25.73% of the Kansas City Chiefs target share. Imagine that, 25% going to a tight end. Now, we may be saying he's a tight end, but let's be honest. He is the number 1 wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs. He had more targets than Tyreek Hill. And yes, Tyreek Hill, the big play ability, going over the top of the defense, getting all those yards, it makes a big difference. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is Travis Kelce is that number 1 receiver there, garnering a lot of the targets and being, Patrick Mahomes' best friend on the field practically. So other than that target share, an argument that I keep making on a weekly basis is the red zone target share that these receivers and tight ends are seeing. Last season, Travis Kelce had 26 targets in the red zone, which stood for 25% of the targets in the red zone for all wide receivers of the Kansas City Chiefs. So he had 25% of the target share in the red zone. Those 26 targets basically accumulated 17 receptions for 9 touchdowns. Comparatively to all other tight ends in the red zone, he was the best because he had the most opportunity and because his team offensively is going to get down there extremely often. So when they're down there so often, Travis Kelce, he's the number 1 receiver, it's all going to work out for him. Now, we already know Travis Kelce is the number 1 tight end. I don't want to talk about it for any longer, but just to really give you my thoughts, if Tyreek Hill, if in fact he is suspended for a substantial amount of time, give or take 6 to 8 weeks, perhaps, you never know. If that ends up being the case, I think Travis Kelce can make an argument to slip in that, first round of fantasy. I'm not even kidding. In half point and full point PPR, I mean, again, he was the number 9 ranked tight end. Number 9 ranked wide receiver if he was a wide receiver last season. Number 1 tight end. And if, in fact, Tyreek Hill is not there, Travis Kelce is going to see an increase in targets, receptions, and fantasy value. So he could potentially work into that first round. You never know. Maybe early second, but either way, Travis Kelce, what a hell of a player. He's my number 1 ranked tight end. All right, let's talk about number 2. Let's talk about Zach Ertz. Last season, Zach Ertz, he broke some records. And this is where we begin to see where that upper echelon of tight ends are at, right? So the number 2 tight end, yes, he may be the number 2, but truly he's just as good. I understand he gets a little bit less, attention comparatively to Travis Kelce, but that really has to do with the fact that Travis Kelce is just ridiculous. But anyway, Zach Ertz last season ended as the number 2 tight end in fantasy with 156 targets for 116 receptions, 1,163 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, all accumulating to 222.3 fantasy points. And on a weekly basis in 16 weeks, that is 13.89 fantasy points per week. In the last 3 seasons, Zach Ertz has finished as the number 6, the number 3, and just recently the number 2 tight end in fantasy. So again, this is another guy that's continued to improve throughout his entire career. Last season had 12 tight end 1 performances, and you'll kind of see that as I'll continue through this video. Because of how thin the tight end position are, these guys don't really have to do much to stay within that top 12 tight end range. So seeing Kelce, Ertz, Kittle as tight end 1s for 12 plus weeks a season, it's not a big surprise, but it makes a pretty big difference comparatively. To put it in perspective, if Zach Ertz was ranked as a wide receiver last year, he would have finished as the wide receiver 12. Yes, he would have been a number 1 or a wide receiver 1 last season. Imagine that. So here's the thing. Zach Ertz, you're attached to one of the better offenses. I think the Eagles, they're pretty stacked offensively. They've got a great offensive line. The quarterback, Carson Wentz, if he can stay healthy, they'll be fantastic. But what was he able to do last year to even create more of an argument for him, for players to draft him early in their fantasy drafts? Last season, he had 26% of the offensive target share. 26% of the offensive target share for the Philadelphia Eagles. On top of that, in the red zone, he had 31.39% of the target share with 27 targets. Imagine that. Those 27 targets led to 16 receptions and 7 touchdowns. Again, Kelce and Ertz, they dominate in the target share of the regular team, and then when they get in the red zone, they're just as efficient and just as effective getting that opportunity, and that's why they produce so many fantasy points. So last season, Zach Ertz, he broke the record for the most receptions for a tight end in a single season. Again, like I mentioned, 116 receptions, broke Jason Witten's record. Fantastic. Now, the thing is, where does Zach Ertz pretty much get his value? It's in those receptions. And how do you get receptions? It's when you're given targets. So when I broke down the stats this season, or for last season, when Zach Ertz had 8+ targets in a single game, all those games combined, he averaged 16.87 fantasy points per game when he was given 8+ targets a game. So if you want Zach Ertz to be good, Philadelphia Eagles, maybe just feed him the ball consistently. And that's what we saw, 156 targets, nearly 10 targets a week. So they're on pace. So if they continue to give him more targets, which I doubt we'll see, because Dallas Goedert, again, the tight end that they drafted last year, he's coming in, he's taking targets away, he's taking touchdowns away. And that's why Zach Ertz has kind of fallen to this, tight end 2 value. So no big deal, but Zach Ertz, again, one of the best. And he's my number 2 tight end. All right, moving on to number 3, George Kittle. All right, so let's talk about George Kittle. Speaking of breaking records, George Kittle broke his own records last season. We'll get into that, but what did he accomplish? He was the number 3 tight end last season with 136 targets, 88 receptions, 1,377 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, all accumulating for 214.7 fantasy points, averaging out on a 16-game basis, 13.42 fantasy points per game. Okay, so the broken record, right? So George Kittle broke the record for most receiving yards in a season by a tight end with 1,377. Ridiculous, right? Now, I think here's the kind of argument that's made on why George Kittle can't kind of jump into that top 2 spots for the tight end position. I think, yes, he was fantastic last year. He almost broke the record for single game most receiving yards. Kyle Shanahan in the second half kind of fell asleep. He could have passed Shannon Sharp's record. That's not a big deal, okay? The big deal is that the 49ers last season, they dealt with a bunch of injuries that really plagued the team. Jimmy Garoppolo went down. CJ Beathard went down. Guess what? You have to play with Nick Mullins. Not bad. Did him well, but still not a great quarterback. On top of that, we saw Jerick McKinnon go down. We saw the likes of Raheem Mostert go down. Pierre Garçon was not healthy. Marquise Goodwin was not healthy. Dante Pettis got hurt later on in the end of the season. I mean, who was really healthy on this team? It was George Kittle. Matt Breida got beat up a little bit. George Kittle was the only consistent part of this offense from week 1 to week 17 last season, and that's why he saw so much opportunity, and that's why he was able to produce on it. He is a talented tight end, and obviously his talents is kind of, it's bolstered the tight ends in the draft. I mean, 2 Iowa State tight ends, or Iowa State? Yeah, I think they're Iowa State, I don't know. Drafted, was it Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson because of Kittle, because he's an alumni of that school, right? But either way, Kittle last season, he saw a lot of opportunity because of the injuries. Now, is that going to affect him? I think he'll see a little bit, he probably will see similar work, but just kind of keep that in mind, because a lot of players were injured last season. There wasn't much talent on the field, and Kittle continued to be the blanket for that offense, a safety blanket. So keep that in mind. But either way, last season he had 25.56% of the target share, 136 targets. And in the red zone, he also had 25.33% of target share, 19 targets, going for 10 receptions and 2 receiving touchdowns. Really, the big difference between a guy like Kittle and Ertz and Kelce was receiving touchdowns. He wasn't able to get those receiving touchdowns in the red zone like his comrades up above. So either way, Kittle, great tight end. He's the number 3 for this year. I think he's not going to see too much regression, but I think this offense with Jimmy Garoppolo, it's going to open up a little bit more. And I think, yes, Kittle's going to be a main factor in this offense. He's going to see a lot of targets, but I'm being safe. So either way, he's my number 3 tight end this year. All right, moving on to number 4, we have O.J. Howard. Now, here's the thing about O.J. Howard. He really only played 9 games last season. I think about week 4 against the Chicago Bears, played like 15 snaps. He had 3 targets for 0 receptions. He got injured. It was a knee injury that everyone was really worried about. I was personally worried about last season. And all of a sudden, the next week, he came back and he was healthy. We got up to about, I think, week 11, and then O.J. Howard had another injury, season-ending, put him on the IR. But all in all, he played technically 10 games, but it really felt like 9. Last season, he ended as the number 13 tight end with only 10 games played. Imagine that. He had 48 targets for 34 receptions, 565 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, all accumulating to 103.5 fantasy points. On average, that's 10.35 fantasy points per the 10 games that he played. So here's the thing. O.J. Howard, drafted out of Alabama, brought into a team that already had an established tight end. Now, many people may be thinking, can he really be a top 4 tight end with Cameron Brate on roster? I 100% believe so. Last season, O.J. Howard, in his 10 games played, really, it was 9. He had 8 tight end 1 performances. Yeah, tight end 1 performances. And when he played on the field with Cameron Brate, he controlled 65% of the offensive snaps and had 67% of the targets between the two of them. So 2/3 of everything was going O.J. Howard's way. And still he was being able to produce tight end 1 numbers on a weekly basis. Again, he barely ended up at the outside of the tight end 1 performance or tight end 1 rankings on only 10 games played. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. So where do I see him this coming season? He's going to be the 3rd receiving option for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers behind Mike Evans, behind Chris Godwin. It's really going to be O.J. Howard as the 3rd receiving option. On top of that, there's a reason why O.J. Howard in his 2nd year was able to take that next step up. It's because he's the better blocking tight end as well for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So he's going to see himself on the field more often than a Cameron Brate. So as of right now, O.J. Howard, he is my number 4 tight end. Last season, he only had 12% of the target share in games that he played, 12.06%. In the red zone, only had 12.5% for 7 targets, 5 receptions, and 4 touchdowns. And to be honest, I think with Bruce Arians coming in, this offense is really going to be predicated on the passing game. It's an offense that they really want to run out of the shotgun primarily. And I think because of the factors that Adam Humphries and Deshaun Jackson are no longer with the team, they moved on through free agency, there opens up more opportunity for guys like O.J. Howard to step up. I really think, looking at the backfield for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, not a lot of receiving options there either, unless Ronald Jones wants to figure out how to catch a ball. There really isn't much else. So outside of Mike Evans, outside of Chris Godwin, it's O.J. Howard, and again, he's one of the younger tight ends in this group, but I think he's going to make that huge step up and step forward this season. He's my number 4 tight end. All right, let's move on to number 5. Another young tight end drafted in the same year, Evan Engram of the New York Giants. Last season, Evan Engram, again, another one of these younger players, but he was plagued with injuries. And here's the thing, that's really a common thing throughout Evan Ingram's career thus far. He's dealt with injuries, but when he's active and when he's playing, he's been pretty good. Similar to, Jordan Reed a couple of years past. But either way, Evan Engram last season for 2018, he finished as the number 12th ranked tight end on 11 games played. He had 64 targets, 45 receptions, 577 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, all accumulating for 103.8 fantasy points, 9.43 per week, just barely above O.J. Howard. But either way, here's the thing. Here's the argument for Evan Engram making that next step forward. With Odell Beckham gone out of this offense, yes, they've brought in Golden Tate. They have Saquon Barkley, who's pretty much going to be the leading receiver on this team. Sterling Shepard, sure, that's fine. The offensive line's better. We don't know who's going to play quarterback. But either way, we know for a fact that Eli Manning loves to throw the ball to Evan Engram. When Odell Beckham has not been in the lineup due to injury or miscellaneous, doesn't matter. In Evan Ingram's career, when Odell Beckham's not in the lineup, he has averaged 11.07 fantasy points per game. On a 16-week basis, if he can consistently stay at 11 points, that's going to make him a top 5 tight end with the landscape that we're looking at right now at the tight end position. So, to be honest, with the opportunity that's going to be presented when it comes to targets and then just staying healthy, Evan Engram, he's consistently going to be up there. And that's why I have him as my number 5 ranked tight end. Last season, in his 11 games played, he had 7 tight end 1 performances, had 18.35% of the target share in games played, only 11.86% of the target share in the red zone, had 7 targets for 4 receptions and 3 touchdowns. Again, comparatively to the top 3 up there, these guys are not going to have a lot of work in the red zone, and that's kind of what makes the huge difference. But either way, I think as long as Evan Engram can stay healthy and this offense can continue to produce as they've done in past, Evan Engram can consistently be a producer and a guy that truly, at the back end of last season, if many of you had picked up Evan Engram in your fantasy playoffs, he made a huge contribution to your team because, Odell Beckham wasn't there. He consistently saw, 5 to 8 targets a week, finding the red zone, and he was fantasy relevant at that time. So I think going into 2019, he should be great. He's my number 5. All right, let's talk about number 6. Let's talk about Eric Ebron. All right, Eric Ebron, he broke a lot of, the expectations for Eric Ebron going to the Indianapolis Colts, they weren't too high. Now, we know for a fact that Andrew Luck, he loves passing the ball to the tight end. He's done so throughout his entire career. He was drafted in 2012. They followed it with Coby Fleener and Dwayne Allen. I mean, they practically drafted 2 tight ends for him because they knew that he loved using the tight end position all through college and into the NFL, and that's what they've consistently done. So Eric Ebron last season, due to a lot of the I guess the argument's going to be because of the fact that Jack Doyle was injured, but we'll go into that a little bit. But either way, Eric Ebron finishes the number 4 tight end last year, 110 targets, 66 receptions, 750 receiving yards, 13 receiving touchdowns. That's right, 13. 189.2 fantasy points, all averaging out to 11.89 fantasy points per game in the last 2 seasons. In 2017, even with the Lions, Eric Ebron was the number 12th ranked tight end in a half-point PPR scoring format. So even though many people don't like Eric Ebron in years prior because of the fact that it just didn't really work out for him with the Detroit Lions that really didn't like to use the tight end position much in their offensive schemes, still was able to produce there, came over to the Colts, ended as the number 4 tight end. Last season had 11 tight end 1 performances, had a lot to do with the fact that he was catching so many touchdowns. But if we put it in perspective, if Eric Ebron was counted as a wide receiver, he would have finished as the number 20 ranked wide receiver from 2018 in half-point PPR scoring format. So, again, another one of these guys that are playing out of their minds and should be valued a lot higher. But either way, last season, what did he see? He saw 17% of the target share within the offense, had 21% of the target share in the red zone, which is a big difference because he saw 21 targets. On those 21 targets, had 12 receptions for 11 touchdowns. So literally almost every reception that he made in the red zone was for a touchdown. And that's where he found his fantasy value. I mean, Andrew Luck looked towards Eric Ebron to be that bigger target down in the red zone in order to help him out and get in, and score those 6 points. And that's exactly where he found it. T.Y. Hilton, he's a smaller receiver. Obviously, Marlon Mack produced well in the red zone, but what are we going to see in 2018 that might slow down Eric Ebron to where I have him as the number 6 spot? I think a lot of that has to do with the offensive additions that they've made. They have the likes of Paris Campbell coming in from the draft. They have Devin Funchess from free agency. They have other guys that are going to continue to improve within this offense from years prior. So I think, yes, Eric Ebron was fantastic, but can he consistently stay with 10-plus receiving touchdowns? I mean, you never know. It's really possible. Now, last season, let's see here. Okay, so here's the argument, right? A lot of people like to make the argument that Jack Doyle, because of his return, it's going to hurt Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron shouldn't be in the top 10, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Relax with that because I'm about to drop some knowledge on you that's going to make you think completely differently on the matter, and it's kind of going to give you more confidence with Eric Ebron being your number 1 tight end. So here's the deal. In the 6 games that Eric Ebron and Jack Doyle played together last season, Eric Ebron scored a total of 74 fantasy points, averaging out to 12.33 fantasy points per game. Great. So in the 6 games he played with Jack Doyle in the lineup, he scored 12.33 fantasy points per game. In the 10 games without Jack Doyle in the lineup, he scored only 11.52 fantasy points per game. So, as I decree right now, Eric Ebron is a better tight end when Jack Doyle is on the field with him, in the lineup with him, and really just stealing all of the offensive snaps. Yet, Eric Ebron continued to find fantasy value through yards, touchdowns, receptions. And to be honest, it kind of makes a pretty big difference. Maybe if you have Jack Doyle on the field, you out there for all the blocking plays, Eric Ebron just has to come in, catch a couple balls, done. But either way, I think because of how valuable Eric Ebron was last season, this offense is not going to fade him. He's not going to fade away. He's going to be used often. He's going to be one of the main targets, and I think he's going to have a fantastic 2019 season. Obviously, Jack Doyle will take targets away, and that's why I have him a little bit lower than usual. I think that 13 touchdown watermark that he left last season, it's going to be really tough to find that again this season. So he's my number 6 tight end, but either way, I have a lot of confidence in him. As I mentioned, he plays better with Jack Doyle on the field. So, all right, moving on. Number 7. All right, here we go. Now, this is where, like I mentioned early on in this video, that I'm splitting hairs, that it really becomes very difficult to kind of determine between these guys, but I'm pretty confident with my 7 through 12 rankings. So for the second half, we're starting number 7, Vance McDonald. I don't even know what I was going to say. I was going to say Jack Doyle. That's what the problem was. So Vance McDonald, number 7 tight end. All right, so here's the thing. Vance McDonald last season, he ended as the number 10 tight end in fantasy. Great. But here's the thing. He spent majority of the time splitting snaps with Jesse James, tight end of the Steelers, but now he is the tight end. I think he's the backup tight end for the Detroit Lions now. So now that Vance McDonald pretty much has the tight end position to himself, should be great. Last season had 72 targets, 50 receptions, 610 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, 108 fantasy points, all averaging out to 7.2 fantasy points per game, 16-week basis. In those 16 weeks, he had 5 tight end 1 performances. I mean, not a big deal considering Jesse James, again, another guy who was taking value. So here's the thing. Is that even right? There's no way that's right. I'm actually curious of that. Let me go and I have to actually look that up. Actually, we'll look that up in a little bit. But either way, let's talk about the combination of McDonald and Jesse James together. So between the two of them, they accumulated 111 targets, 80 receptions, 1,033 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns between the two of them. Now, let's say, for example, Jesse James is gone. Vance McDonald's the tight end 1. Now we kind of throw in that wrench that, hey, Antonio Brown's no longer in this lineup. There's 150 targets up for grabs. So not only are you going to get all of, or at least 85% of the tight end snaps, you have more opportunity because there isn't an Antonio Brown garnering and just absorbing all of the attention from Big Ben Roethlisberger and the targets from him. So Vance McDonald, in my eyes, truly should be seeing a lot of targets this season. If Vance McDonald gets up to 100 targets, I am without a doubt not going to be surprised. That's exactly what I'm kind of projecting at this point. I think Vance McDonald, as a tight end within this offense, a tight end that has shown himself to have value, to have skill, he's going to be able to produce. Okay, I'm actually curious. I have to look this up because I have a number in front of me that looks insane that I don't think happens to be true. There's no way that he had that much percent of the offensive target share. All right, we're doing some math, ladies and gentlemen. We're on the fly. We're switching it up. So he had 82 targets, and therefore he saw... okay, that's what I thought. So last season, Vance McDonald only saw 12% of the target share of the Steelers' offense. Again, still ended as the number 10 tight end. Only saw 12% of the target share. On top of that, he only saw 12.04% of the target share in the red zone with only 10 targets, 5 receptions, and 3 touchdowns. I personally think that, I might be the only one here, but again, we're splitting hairs. Vance McDonald is going to take that step forward. He's another young tight end, and I think if in fact there are so many targets up for grab, what is Dante Moncrief? Is Ryan Switzer going to come? James Washington? Are those guys really going to take away all 150 of those targets to leave Vance McDonald high and dry? I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Vance McDonald's going to see more targets. That opportunity is going to lead to success, and that's why I have him as my number 7 ranked tight end this year. All right, let's move on. Number 8, David Njoku. Okay, so here's the thing about Njoku. Last season, had him as a top 12 tight end. He was okay. I thought he'd do better. Last season ended as the number 9 ranked tight end, and he was okay. It wasn't anything special. 88 targets, 56 receptions, 639 receiving yards for 4 touchdowns, 115.9 fantasy points, 7.24 fantasy points per game. No big deal. 6 tight end 1 performances. Again, here's the thing about David Njoku. He's going to his 3rd season, and I think if we kind of take into account what he's capable of doing within this offense, if this offense is at an elite level, because we have Jarvis Landry now, Odell Beckham, Nick Chubb in his second year, Baker Mayfield in his second year, the second best offensive line in fantasy football according to Pro Football Focus. This offense is going to move the ball without a doubt. And once you move the ball, David Njoku truly might be the third receiving option of this team. With all the noise that's come out about Duke Johnson wanting to be traded because of the fact that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are there, Duke Johnson might not make it through. I mean, he hasn't even showed up to OTAs this offseason, so there's a good chance that he's gone. Are we going to see David Njoku take the next step forward, increase on 88 targets? I think we're going to see that. Last season, in games where in the 13 games that he played with Baker Mayfield, when Baker Mayfield started, he averaged 8.04% or 8.04 fantasy points per game, Pretty decent. And I think David Njoku, if the offense takes that next step forward, if they continue to find themselves in the red zone, he's a bigger target. He's a 6'5 giant that's going to see a lot of targets there. Last season, normally saw 15.33% of the targets, or at least the target share. In the red zone, had only 13.56% of the target share, 8 targets, 5 receptions, all 5 receptions leading to touchdowns, so 5 touchdowns in the red zone. I think if, in fact, David Njoku and this offense can take its next step forward, he can see himself being a number 8 tight end. I truly think so. I mean, it's not really too far out from where he was last season. Also, when I looked at his stats, David Njoku really, I think, the kind of determining factor is going to be targets in the red zone and touchdowns next season. If he's able to increase on that, it's fantastic, because in 8 of his 13 games with Baker Mayfield, he had 50 receiving yards. That's right. So if you already have those 5 automatic points right there, you add in a couple sprinkles of targets, okay, good. You have about 3 to 4 receptions. You add a touchdown there. I mean, this guy's going to be scoring you 12 points a game. But that, we'll see. Either way, David Njoku, I'm pretty confident in the fact that he can step up this year in his third year. He's my number 8. All right, moving on to number 9, Jared Cook Jr. Here's the thing. I think Jared Cook's a fantastic tight end. I think he had one of his best seasons. No, he definitively did have his best season of his entire career last season. He had 101 targets, 68 receptions, 896 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, all accumulating to 159.6 fantasy points, 9.97 fantasy points per week. Ended as the number 5 tight end last season. Fantastic. He was the number 1 receiving option of the Raiders in targets, receptions, yards, touchdown. That didn't matter. He was the number 1 in all of them. Jared Cook was literally the offense of the Oakland Raiders last season. And I think that's going to trick a lot of people. Yes, Jared Cook was the number 5 tight end. Yes, he had 7 tight end 1 performances last season. If you had him in as the wide receiver last year, he would have ended as the number 28 wide receiver. These are all great stats. These are a lot of things that make you confident in drafting Jared Cook. But he's not going to come into a Saints offense in which they throw the ball way less. They only threw the ball 436 times off the top of my head, if I'm not mistaken, last season. He's not going to come in and see 101 targets. When you have Dan Arnold, when you have, what's that blocking tight end? It eluded me. Someone in the comments hook me up. Heath? No, I don't know. When you have 2 other tight ends on roster that have taken targets away from guys like Ben Watson in the past, I don't think Jared Cook's going to come in and have 101 target kind of season. When you have Michael Thomas, Kamara, Ted Ginn, Traquan Smith within this offense, I don't see Jared Cook coming in and just tearing it up. Now, last season, he did have 18% of the target share for the Raiders. He had 23.81% of the target share in the red zone for the Raiders, accumulating for 15 targets, 10 receptions, 3 touchdowns. These are all great. But to be honest, I think with the way that Drew Brees has played in his career, I think he had 13 touchdowns to 13 different targets last season. It doesn't matter. If you're open, Drew Brees is going to find you, and I don't think he plays favorites outside of Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. I think Jared Cook could be the number 3 receiving option of this team, but I don't see him making a huge jump this season, or at least staying at that number 5 tight end watermark that he left last season. That's why I have him a little bit lower. I have confidence that the tight end position is pretty heavily used, and it has been heavily used in the past by the Saints. Back in the Jimmy Graham days, in Jimmy Graham's last 3 seasons with the Saints, averaged 138 targets per season. So obviously there is an ability to pass the ball there. But as of late, when we go to that two-headed monster scheme where they run the ball heavily, Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, those guys are going to see the ball on the ground very often. And I think that's going to reduce the value of Jared Cook comparatively. So therefore, I have him as my number 9 tight end. I think he's still great, but just a little bit less, a little bit of regression this season. All right, let's move on to number 10, Hunter Henry. I think Hunter Henry, it's interesting. So last offseason, during OTAs, similar to like right now, Hunter Henry tore his ACL. Boom, season was over from then. Didn't play a single regular season game. If I'm not mistaken, he was active for the playoff game against the Patriots. Didn't do much there either. No big deal. They didn't really need to rush him back. He had missed the entirety of the season. So either way. So let's talk about what he was able to do in 2017. In 2017, he saw 62 targets for 45 receptions, 578 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. In 2017, had 104.4 fantasy points for 8.7 fantasy points per game. I think he only played 12 games in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why Antonio Gates was still there. Antonio Gates saw a pretty good amount of targets. But either way, here's the thing about Hunter Henry going into this season. The San Diego Chargers, wow, that one, interesting. The Los Angeles Chargers last season, with Antonio Gates and Virgil Green as their top 2 tight ends last season, they saw 73 targets combined, the both of them. But here's the thing. We have Antonio Gates that's practically 1,000 years old, and we have Virgil Green, who is a primary blocking tight end, who should never see anything in the passing game. That being said, Hunter Henry's coming in. He's going to be the tight end 1. Now, when you're the tight end 1 of the Los Angeles Chargers, it's pretty difficult because you're probably not going to see a lot of targets. We have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, Melvin Gordon. Yes, Tyrell Williams, he's no longer with the team. We can throw those 65 targets up in the air for other receivers to be able to make plays. Perhaps that'll go towards Hunter Henry. But either way, I think Hunter Henry, he's going to be a top 12 tight end for this Chargers team because of the fact that this offense, they know how to move the ball. They get down in the red zone. And that's exactly where he's going to find a lot of his value. He's a bigger target, and he's going to help out in the red zone with Mike Williams, opposite side of him. I think Hunter Henry, yes, he's being overvalued by a lot of fantasy analysts as of right now. Maybe he ends up being a top 5 tight end, but I think that's a little too much, especially for a receiver coming off a torn ACL, a receiver that is going in an offense that really likes to spread it out with a lot of receiving back potential. I see him as my number 10 tight end, and I like him at that spot. So that's where I'm going to leave him. He's my number 10 tight end. All right, moving on to number 11. Now, here's the thing. I really like Austin Hooper. I can't stand it. I hate Austin Hooper, but for some reason in fantasy, it's just a love-hate relationship, and I cannot stop it. Now, that being said, Austin Hooper last season ended as the number 6 tight end. Pretty crazy, right? Exactly. Last season had 88 targets, 71 receptions, 660 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, 127.5 fantasy points, 7.97 fantasy points per week. 6 tight end 1 performances. No big deal. Here's the thing about Austin Hooper. Last season had 14% of the target share within the offense. The offense threw the ball 617 times, the most in Matt Ryan's days. Last season, they threw the ball 65% of the time and only ran the ball 35% of the time. I mean, that offensive breakdown, we're not going to see that again this season. I understand offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter is coming in from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to replace Steve Sarkisian, but I do not see this offense throwing the ball 65% of the time. So where are those targets going to disappear from? I think Mohamed Sanu and I think Austin Hooper are going to see less targets this year comparatively, guys, like Julio and Calvin Ridley, who are going to be the top 2 wide receivers on this team. So here's the thing. Last season in the red zone, saw a pretty good amount of targets, 16.88% with 13 targets leading to 9 receptions, 4 receiving touchdowns. Austin Hooper was a pretty big part of this offense. But I think this offense in the passing game is going to regress a little. But I don't think that's going to kill Austin Hooper's fantasy value. I had a hard time ranking Austin Hooper. I really could have put him at number 8 and been happy with it. That's how much I like Austin Hooper, but that's perhaps a little bit of favoritism. That's why I put him at 11, because I want to have a clean conscience by the end of the day. But either way, here's the thing. Here's the argument for Austin Hooper. We've seen with Dirk Cutter, offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last season and the last couple seasons, we've seen what he's done with tight ends. He's made Cameron Bray a great tight end. He's made O.J. Howard a great tight end. Okay, and they use those tight ends a pretty good amount this last season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. That being said, now that you come over to Atlanta, maybe that's a one-year thing, but that's not the case. When Dirk Cutter was the offensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons in 2012 and 2013, yes, they had a Tony Gonzalez at the tight end position, but Tony Gonzalez was seeing a ridiculous, I think he was seeing 115 plus targets a season. So yes, he likes to throw the ball to the tight end position. He's done it in the past while he's been with the Atlanta Falcons. Maybe Austin Hooper can be that spot for him. We know that his offenses like to use the tight end position, so why not? Either way, Austin Hooper, you're not going to be as good as you were last year. I think a lot of tight ends are improving. I think his statistics may stay similar to what it was, but because of all the tight ends above him moving up a little bit or regressing just a tad bit, I think Austin Hooper at 11 is a pretty safe spot. All right, moving on to my last tight end, because I don't want to be talking about tight ends all day. Tight end position is a joke. It really is. I mean, the fact that there can be anybody. I could literally put anybody at this number 12 spot. But I put Kyle Rudolph here specifically because of his consistency in the last couple seasons. In 2016, he was the number 2 tight end. In 2017, he was the number 7 tight end. Last year, the number 8 tight end in fantasy. I think Kyle Rudolph within this offense, yes, he's been consistent. And no matter what the quarterback, imagine Sam Bradford, Case Keenum, now Kirk Cousins, it doesn't matter. He still is talented enough to be a top 12 tight end, and that's why I have him at 12. Consistency. Last season, 82 targets, 64 receptions, 643 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, 119.4 fantasy points, 7.46 per game, 5 tight end 1 performances. So 13.53% of the offensive target share, 20.83% of the target share in the red zone. Pretty big deal. 15 targets leading to 8 receptions and 3 touchdowns. Here's the thing. I think really we could have had anybody here, but I think Kyle Rudolph, there is a chance that either Kyle Rudolph ends up at the number 12 spot or Kyle Rudolph is traded to the New England Patriots in the next couple weeks because Ben Watson just got a suspension for, I think, PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs. He's going to be out the first 4 games. I think there's a chance that he could be traded to the New England Patriots. And if that happens, rankings are subject to change. He ends up being a top 7 tight end, no big deal. But either way, I think with the target share that he's seeing in an offense that loves to throw the ball, I think his consistency just leaves him up here. I think Kyle Rudolph, yes, in the last couple of seasons, really has not seen a lot of the targets that he saw in seasons prior. With Sam Bradford, had one of the best seasons of his career. Probably will have the best season of his career. It's long gone. It's not going to happen again. But either way, I think his consistency, his ability to just be an okay tight end, not going to win your week. He had a couple games last year which won weeks. I think he had like a 100-yard, 2 touchdown receiving. It doesn't matter. Regardless, Kyle Rudolph, you're my number 12. I'm not excited about it. There's a lot of honorable mentions. I could have had Trey Burton here. I could have had Delaney Walker here. I just, I feel confident with the consistency of Rudolph, and that's why he's going to close out my list. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button for more content for the 2019 fantasy season. Now that I've finished all 4 positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end rankings, I will be doing a live mock draft to show you guys where exactly I land. And that'll be it. So thank you everybody for watching. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, what your rankings are, hit me up down below. I'll be sure to check you guys your comments out. And thank you again for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.